What would you do if the person who ended your career was also the father of your unborn child? No warning, no support, just a sealed envelope and silence. Claire Bennett didn't scream. She didn't fight. She packed her things, moved to a new town, and raised her daughter alone while holding on to one unopened envelope and 1,000 untold stories. She built something from nothing between diaper changes and midnight coding, between overdue bills and soft bedtime songs. Not out of spite, but out of love. And when fate brought her face to face with the man who once erased her, she didn't seek revenge. She stood up not to confront him, but to become fully herself. This is a story about dignity, resilience, and the quiet power of a woman who chose grace over anger and built a legacy instead of a grudge. If this story touches you, we invite you to comment below. Share what you would do if you were in Claire's shoes. And now, let us take you back to the moment she stepped onto the stage. She walked onto the stage without fanfare. No one clapped. No one recognized her. But one man in the front row sat frozen, as if the ghost of his past had come to speak. The room smelled of wealth-clean linen, polished oak, and the faint trace of imported cologne. A place where success wasn't spoken of with pride, but assumed like breath. The 2024 National Finance Leadership Summit was the kind of event where people came not just to share ideas, but to affirm that they belonged among the powerful. Spotlights softened over the main stage as a name appeared on the screen in understated serif font: Claire Bennett, CEO, Cedar Tech Financials. There were no murmurs of recognition, no whispers of, "Oh, I've heard of her." Just the sound of her heels against the stage floor, confident but unhurried. She stepped behind the podium with the calm of someone who had nothing left to prove. Her cream-colored blazer caught the light just enough to stand out, but not to dazzle. The silence wasn't awkward, it was expectant. In the third row, Jonathan Reed lowered his water glass without taking a sip. He blinked twice, leaned forward just slightly, and narrowed his eyes. No, it couldn't be, but it was. 12 years. 12 years since he'd last seen her. Back then, she had been quiet, efficient, always early, always unnoticed unless something needed fixing. A woman whose presence filled gaps, never rooms. But now, she stood straighter. Her gaze was direct, steady, not proud, not defiant, just grounded. Claire scanned the audience, not searching for a face, but reading the room like a seasoned speaker. And when she spoke, her voice was like warm water in a cold glass, soothing, but disarming. "I wasn't always invited into rooms like this," she began, letting the words settle gently into the silence. "In fact, I used to stand just outside them, holding a clipboard, filling pictures, waiting for someone to call my name. And often, no one did. A few chuckled politely. A man on the left adjusted his tie. A woman near the aisle leaned in, curious. I was let go from a company." She continued, still calm, still composed. "Not for poor performance, not for a mistake, just because I no longer fit their picture." There was a long pause. She didn't look at Jonathan. She didn't need to. "I was fired," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "When I was carrying a child I hadn't yet dared to name. And there it was." The silence thickened. It wasn't shock, it was reflection, recognition. For some, perhaps even guilt. But for one man in particular, it was memory. A memory not buried deep, but shelved, unopened, like a letter you can't quite bring yourself to read. Jonathan felt his throat tighten. The image came uninvited. Claire, standing in his office, eyes wide but dry, holding something unsaid in her mouth. He'd been efficient that day. Professional, dismissive. He remembered the envelope, the pen, the silence that followed her out of the room. Claire took a breath and placed her hands flat on the podium. No theatrics, no dramatic tone, just steady storytelling. "I'm not here today to shame anyone," she said. "I'm here because stories like mine don't get told enough in rooms like this." A man in the back coughed softly. No one else moved. "There are women," she continued, "who build entire futures from scraps, who raise children while raising capital, who keep going without applause, without protection, without certainty. Still no slides, no data, just her words, painting pictures more vivid than charts ever could." Claire paused, letting her eyes wander for the first time. She didn't land on Jonathan, but her gaze brushed past him like a breeze that carried meaning. "I didn't come to ask for sympathy," she said. "I came to share something real." "Because we're all here to talk about leadership, and I think that should start with honesty." In the front row, Jonathan's fingers curled around his pen, but he didn't write anything. "She never said my name." He thought, but she didn't have to. The weight of the moment didn't come from accusation. It came from restraint. She could have humiliated him. She could have made it about the past. Instead, she made it about the truth and what it costs to carry it quietly for years. Claire leaned slightly forward. "When you lose everything, you learn to build differently," she said. "Not taller, not flashier, just stronger." Her voice wavered slightly on that last word. Not from nerves, from truth. Behind her, the screen remained blank. Her choice. Let the silence be the slide. Let the stillness carry the story. "I once left a building like this with a sealed envelope," she said, her voice softening even more. "I never opened it, and maybe I never will. But what I've built since then, I carry with me every day." The room exhaled all at once, like it had been holding breath without knowing. In the third row, Jonathan sat still. The past was no longer behind him. It was standing at the podium, telling the world it had survived him. And Claire. She closed her opening remarks with the kind of grace that cannot be faked. The room went quiet, but her story was only just beginning. Before she was the woman on stage, she was just a quiet assistant in the corner office, barely noticed, barely thanked. In 2012, Claire Bennett was 30 years old and lived in a modest second-floor apartment above a bakery in West Seattle. The apartment had old pipes that rattled at night and a heater that worked best when she didn't need it. But the place was clean, and it was hers. Each morning, Claire took the 6:40 bus into downtown, holding a thermos of weak coffee and a spiral notebook filled with task lists she rewrote every night. She arrived at the offices of Reed Tech Capital before the lights turned on, unlocking doors, aligning chairs, setting the day in motion for people who would never quite notice her doing it. She was the executive assistant to the CEO, a title that sounded more powerful than it was. But she took pride in the details. The printer never jammed on her watch. The conference room glasses were always aligned. If there was a crisis, she solved it before it reached anyone else's inbox. And she asked for nothing in return. Claire didn't make small talk in the break room. She didn't linger near windows or check social media on company time. She had the quiet dignity of someone who had long ago decided that invisibility was safer than asking to be seen. Her co-workers described her as efficient, reliable, low maintenance. They said it like compliments, though none had ever asked her about her weekend. They didn't know she lived alone, or that she spent Saturday mornings volunteering at a library. shelving books in alphabetical order because it gave her a strange sense of control. They didn't know she was from Arkansas, or that she hadn't spoken to her mother in 8 years, or that her father had left when she was 9, taking the good dishes and the last of the gas money. Claire had built her adult life like someone layering bricks over a thin crack in the wall, methodical, careful, hoping no one would see what lay underneath. At Reed Tech, she was surrounded by brilliance graduates from Ivy League schools, consultants with fast-track resumes, men in suits who talked in acronyms and leaned back in leather chairs like they owned the world. She didn't envy them. Not exactly. But some days, when the elevator doors closed just a second too slowly, she'd catch her own reflection and wonder what she might look like in one of those lives. Jonathan Reed, the CEO, was someone she saw every day but spoke to only when necessary. He was younger than most imagined, just 36 at the time, but already a known name in financial circles. Charismatic, articulate, always one sentence ahead of the room. He never looked at Claire the way others did. That is to say, he barely looked at her at all. Until one Tuesday morning, the firm was hosting an internal strategy meeting. Someone from marketing had called in sick, and Claire was asked to step in to present a report she had quietly assembled behind the scenes. It wasn't a glamorous moment, just a few slides, some bullet points, a brief window into data she knew better than anyone. She stood near the screen, clutching the clicker like it might disappear. Her voice was steady, if a bit quiet. No one interrupted. No one praised her either. But Jonathan looked up, and, for a moment, he didn't look away. He asked a question about a trend she had highlighted in the report. She answered, clearly, concisely. He nodded, then asked another, and another. It was the first time he had spoken to her for more than 30 seconds. The first time her name left his lips with something other than instruction behind it. When the meeting ended, Claire gathered the papers, returned the markers to the tray, and began to stack the untouched water bottles. She didn't expect him to say anything, so when he approached, she kept her eyes on the table. "You put that report together yourself?" he asked. She glanced up, surprised. Yes, it was solid work, better than the last two from the actual department. A compliment, direct, brief, but more than she had received in her entire tenure. Claire nodded, unsure whether to thank him or not. He was already walking away. That night, as she walked home from the bus stop, she passed a bookstore with a display about women in leadership. She paused not because she saw herself in those titles, but because, for 1 second, she wondered if maybe she could. She didn't know it yet, but this brief moment of visibility would change everything. It only took one evening to unravel a life she had built with silence and dignity. The retreat at Napa Valley was the kind of event Claire never expected to be part of. It was polished, exclusive, a weekend curated for the firm's top-tier leaders, where suits were traded for sports coats and wine did most of the talking. She'd only been invited because someone from the executive team had pulled out at the last minute. Claire, ever the quiet achiever, was known for stepping in without fuss. She had no title that warranted attendance, but someone needed to manage logistics and keep everything running smoothly, and she did that better than anyone. The estate, nestled among the vineyards, felt like another world, golden sunlight draped over olive trees, slate pathways winding between cottages with wraparound porches. Everything smelled like rosemary and oak. For the first time in a long time, Claire exhaled. She packed a single suitcase, one black dress, low heels, a second-hand shawl she'd found on sale months ago but hadn't yet worn. She didn't expect to be noticed. In her experience, invisibility was safer than visibility. But Napa had a way of softening edges, even hers. The second evening was a garden dinner under a canopy of twinkle lights and stars. A long table stretched down the center of the courtyard, lined with white tablecloths and glassware that shimmered in the warm breeze. Claire found a seat near the far end, next to the operations lead and a retired partner who mostly talked about golf. Halfway through the evening, while conversations floated around her like background music, Jonathan Reed approached. He wasn't in his usual Navy suit, but a charcoal blazer and no tie, sleeves slightly rolled. He looked, for once, not like the CEO, but like a man who had let his shoulders rest. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, wineglass in hand. Claire blinked, caught off guard. "Sure," she said, scooting her chair. He sat beside her. Not across, beside. At first, they talked about work, numbers, projections, office renovations, safe things. But then, the conversation shifted. Jonathan asked where she was from. Claire hesitated, then said, "A little town in Arkansas." "You've never heard of it." He smiled. "Try me." She didn't, but she told him anyway. She told him about her grandmother's old porch swing, how it creaked in the wind, about the storm that flooded their trailer when she was 8, and how they slept in the church basement for a week. She hadn't shared that story with anyone in years. He told her about boarding school, about expectations layered thick on his shoulders since he was 12, about how lonely success could feel when no one knew the version of you without the tie. And then came the laughter. The kind that feels like it doesn't belong at a business retreat, but shows up anyway when two people stop performing and start being. When dinner ended and the guests dispersed, Jonathan asked if she wanted to walk the grounds. Claire hesitated. She wasn't naive, but something in his tone felt sincere, and something in her heart felt open. They wandered beneath grapevine trellises, talking softly, sharing quiet. No one was watching, no one cared. And for a brief stretch of time, Claire forgot who they were supposed to be. She only remembered how it felt to be seen. Later, in a guest cottage with cream-colored curtains and lavender soap, they crossed an invisible line. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, slow, and full of something neither of them named a loud longing, maybe, or loneliness, or a fragile hope. She traced the curve of his shoulder in the low light. He touched the back of her hand like it was something rare. They fell asleep without making promises, but with the weight of something unspoken between them. In the morning, he was cordial, polite. He made small talk while buttoning his cufflinks. He thanked her for a good night, but his eyes didn't linger, and by the time they returned to Seattle, the warmth had vanished. Claire told herself not to read into it, but silence, when it follows intimacy, speaks volumes. She left a voicemail just checking in. No reply. Then another. Still nothing. Back at the office, everything was back in order. Jonathan passed her in hallways, nodded briefly in meetings. It was as if Napa never happened, as if she had imagined it all. But she hadn't. She felt it in her chest, in the pause before sleep. In the ache of uncertainty, she still showed up to work early, still aligned the chairs, still brewed the coffee just the way he liked it. But something inside her had shifted. A hope had bloomed, and now it curled inward, unwatered. She watched her phone more often, checked her inbox before bed, hoping, then bracing, then nothing. A missed call, then 2, then none, until all she had left was silence and something growing inside her. She walked into his office, not for revenge, not for tears, but to tell him something important. She left with a sealed envelope. Claire waited until the end of the day. It was a Wednesday. The sky outside was pale and damp, like it couldn't decide whether to rain or not. Most of the staff had gone home. The office lights hummed with the kind of silence that only came when everything superficial had been cleared away. She had rehearsed what she would say. Not in front of a mirror, she didn't need to see herself, but in the quiet of her own mind, while stirring soup, folding laundry, counting subway stops. Now, standing outside his office door. She felt her breath catch, not from fear, but from the weight of truth. She knocked gently, one solid tap. "Come in." Jonathan was standing near the window, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled, glass of sparkling water in his hand. He looked up, surprised to see her. "Claire," he said, "you're still here." "Yes," she replied, stepping in and closing the door behind her. He gestured toward the chair in front of his desk. She didn't sit. "I won't take much of your time," she began, voice steady. Jonathan raised a brow. "Is everything all right?" She swallowed. "I'm pregnant." The silence between them stretched. At first, there was no reaction, no visible shift in his expression. He simply stared at her, as if trying to parse a language he didn't speak fluently. Then came the tightening of the jaw, the way he slowly placed the glass on the windowsill as if buying time. "With me?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew. Claire nodded. Yes. He didn't curse, didn't shout. But somehow, his calmness felt colder than anger. "Are you sure," he asked, "that it's mine?" Her chest clenched, not because she questioned herself, but because he did. "I haven't been with anyone else." Jonathan turned away, facing the city skyline outside the window. "This complicates things." "I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. "I just thought you should know." He turned back to her, eyes sharper now. "You understand how this could look. You work for me. You show up with this news. What do you expect people to think?" Claire's breath hitched, but she stood her ground. "I'm not looking for attention, Jonathan, or money, or a relationship. I just wanted to be honest." He walked to his desk, pulled open a drawer. His movements were too smooth, too rehearsed, like he had played this scene in his head before. When he looked up again, he was holding a white envelope. "I don't think it's best for you to continue here," he said, his voice clipped, corporate. Claire's heart dropped. "I'm being generous," he added, as if to soften the blow. "I've prepared a severance. It's more than fair. $75,000. Tax accounted. The paperwork is inside." She stared at the envelope. "There's a resignation letter, too," he continued. "If you sign it, HR will process it as voluntary. No questions. No gossip." She said nothing. "Claire," he said, slightly softer, "this is cleaner for both of us." Cleaner, as if her life were a smudge on his resume. She stepped forward and took the envelope from his hand. It was thick, heavier than it looked. She didn't open it, didn't ask what was inside. Instead, she nodded once more to herself, then to him, and turned toward the door. "Is this what I meant to you?" she asked quietly. Hand on the doorknob. Jonathan didn't respond. Claire didn't wait for him to. She walked out of that office, out of that chapter of her life, without slamming the door. She didn't cry. She didn't crumble. She went home, sat on the edge of her bed, placed the envelope on the table next to her. She made tea, listened to the kettle whistle, stirred in honey, took a single sip. Then she stared at the envelope. Its edges were sharp, its surface smooth. A piece of her wanted to tear it open to see the number, the check, the paperwork that reduced her to a liability. But she didn't. Instead, she picked up a cloth napkin from the kitchen drawer, wrapped the envelope like a delicate keepsake, and tucked it away in a box under her bed. She never opened it. Not that day. not the next, and not for the next 12 years. Some women have baby showers. Claire had a borrowed blanket, a hospital bill, and no one waiting outside the delivery room. She left Seattle with one suitcase, a pregnancy 6 months along, and $2,000 from her savings, carefully withdrawn in $100 bills, folded into a used leather wallet that had belonged to her grandmother. She didn't tell anyone she was going, not her landlord, not the HR department, not the few co-workers who might have noticed her absence. She chose Spokane because it was far enough to disappear, but close enough to feel familiar. The rent was cheaper, the air quieter. It was a place where no one knew her name. That felt like safety. Claire found a basement apartment in a house owned by an older woman named Mrs. Landry, who rented it out for cash and didn't ask questions. The place smelled like dust and linoleum, but it had hot water and a small window that looked out onto a patch of dandelions. 3 weeks later, Claire went into labor in the middle of the night. She took a cab to the county hospital alone, her breaths shallow and uneven, her coat too thin for October. She gave birth to a baby girl at 3:14 a.m. She named her Lila. No one brought flowers, no balloons, no celebratory cupcakes from co-workers, just a nurse who held her hand during contractions, and a janitor who mopped around her bed as she dozed off between feedings. The hospital bill arrived 2 weeks later. Claire opened it slowly, like peeling off a bandage from a wound she already knew would hurt. She folded it neatly and placed it under her pillow. Then she went to work, not to an office, but to survival. She applied for every job that paid cash or close to minimum wage. Day shifts as a receptionist at a dental clinic, evenings typing numbers into spreadsheets for a tax prep firm, night shifts cleaning offices, dusting keyboards, emptying trash bins, vacuuming rugs with stains older than her child. She kept a careful schedule nap when Lila napped, pump milk between tasks, batch cook oatmeal to last 3 days. Nothing was wasted, not time, not energy, not emotion. And still, it barely added up. Lila was small for her age, fragile, her lungs never fully strong. At 3 months, she developed a cough that kept Claire awake every night. At 6 months, the doctor prescribed an inhaler and warned that cold weather would only make things worse. Claire bought second-hand sweaters. She taped blankets to the windows. She carried Lila wrapped close to her chest, tucked in like a heartbeat. But the costs grew. Medications, co-pays, a new crib mattress when the old one grew too soft, bottles, diapers, bus fare. Claire never called Jonathan, never emailed, never even thought about the envelope still tucked under her bed in Spokane. It had become more symbol than solution. She didn't want money that came with silence. She didn't want help offered from guilt. She wanted to do it on her own, and she almost did, until one night. In the middle of January, the power bill arrived 2 days early. It was higher than usual, colder month, longer nights. Claire checked her bank app. $48.12 remained. The inhaler refill cost $39. The electricity payment was $61. She sat at the kitchen table, a flickering bulb overhead, Lila asleep in the other room, wheezing softly. It was a choice no mother should have to make. Keep the lights on, or help her child breathe. Claire stood up, put on her coat, and walked 2 blocks to the pharmacy. She handed over her card and accepted the paper bag with trembling fingers. The receipt fluttered in her hand as she walked home, the cold air slicing at her cheeks. When she got back, the apartment was dark. The power had already been cut. She lit 2 candles, set Lila down gently, heated water on the stovetop with a match, rocked her baby until the wheezing softened. Then, she sat at the table, opened her old laptop, and stared at the blinking cursor on a blank screen. She didn't know what she was building, but she knew it had to be hers. She Googled quietly how to build a basic web page. Free tools for coding, simple front-end design. She taught herself line by line, a header, a button, a form that went nowhere yet. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and it was the first thing she had made for herself in a very, very long time. That night, she chose the inhaler, and by candlelight, she made her first line of code. While the world slept, Claire built something no one could take from her. The nights were long in Spokane. After feeding Lila, after cleaning bottles, after wiping down the counter with the same frayed towel every night, Claire would open her laptop, its fan, wheezing louder with every passing week, and begin typing. She sat at the small kitchen table, the one with a cracked leg and coffee rings stained into the wood, and worked while her daughter slept 2 feet away. The first few weeks, it was just fragments. A landing page, a mock calculator, a vision scribbled in the margins of grocery receipts. But soon, it became something more. Claire had once proposed a budgeting tool to ReadTech, a simple, intuitive software that could help low-income families understand their finances. The team dismissed it. Too small a market. They'd said, not scalable, not sexy, but now, with nothing left to lose. Claire returned to that idea. Only this time, she didn't ask for permission. She built the tool from the ground up. A sleek, mobile-first interface, color-coded budgets, emergency planning templates, a section for single parents with income tracking tied to real-world variables, shift work, tip wages, government aid schedules. She called it Cedar. The name came from a tree her grandmother used to point out on walks. Strong roots, grows slow, but steady, she'd said. Claire didn't know much about branding, but she knew about survival. She knew what it meant to stretch $50 over 2 weeks. She knew how terrifying it felt to not understand a bill, or miss a rent deadline by hours, or choose medicine over groceries. She built Cedar not just as an app, but as a lifeline for women like her. By day, she still answered phones at the clinic, still swept floors and filed insurance paperwork. But at night, she coded like her future depended on it. Because it did, after 6 months, she had a working prototype. It was raw, a little buggy, but it worked. She created a pitch deck using free online templates, recorded a demo video with her cracked phone, Lila occasionally gurgling in the background. Then she began submitting her idea to every startup incubator and women's business grant she could find. Most never replied. A few sent kind rejections, but one, an organization based out of Portland, asked for a Zoom call. Claire wore her only blazer, combed her hair straight, and positioned the camera so no one could see the peeling paint behind her. She spoke clearly, confidently. She told them not just about the app, but about the women it was made for. She didn't pitch with buzzwords. She told a story. And 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in her inbox. She had been awarded $100,000 in seed funding. No strings attached, no equity taken. Just one sentence, "We believe in you." She stared at the screen in disbelief. Then she cried quietly, the way she had learned to cry since becoming a mother, with her hand over her mouth, so as not to wake the baby. The next day, she bought a refurbished laptop, upgraded her software, hired a local developer, a single dad who worked out of his garage to help refine the back end. They worked at her kitchen table, side by side, Lila toddling between their legs. She registered her company as Cedar Tech Financials. Her business address was a P.O. box. Her office was still a rental apartment. Her meetings were taken on park benches with a thermos of coffee and a diaper bag slung over her shoulder. But it was hers. She started sharing Cedar in online forums for single parents, then in Facebook groups, then on Reddit threads buried under noise, and slowly, people began to download it. First 50, then 500, then thousands. Women messaged her, saying the app helped them plan for childcare, helped them save for emergencies, helped them breathe easier. Claire never added her full name to the site. She didn't need credit. She needed impact. Cedar was growing, not fast, but real. And through it all, Lila watched. She watched her mother type through dinner. She watched her balance bills with wire-thin margins. She watched her say no to defeat again and again. One night, as Claire pushed a new update to the appy, a feature that allowed users to auto-calculate weekly grocery limits, she looked over and saw Lila, now almost 4, sitting beside her with a toy laptop. "Are you building something?" Claire asked. Lila nodded. "I'm making a map." Claire smiled. She didn't have much, but she had a product, a mission, and a little girl watching. Most startups begin in garages. Hers began in silence, between diaper changes and code reviews. Cedar Tech didn't launch with fanfare or a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It didn't have an office with glass walls or a ping-pong table in the break room. It began with one woman, one child, and a second-hand laptop on a kitchen table that wobbled on one side. The early years were hard in the kind of quiet way only single mothers truly understand. Claire worked during Lila's nap times, her tiny hand resting against Claire's arm as she typed. When Lila woke crying from a cough or a bad dream, Claire paused everything because code could wait, but her child couldn't. She cooked with coupons, paid rent in cash, bought toys from donation bins, and every night after dishes were done and Lila was asleep, she turned the lamp back on and went back to work. Cedar Tech grew one update at a time. She listened to the app's users, often mothers like her women balancing 2 jobs, fighting eviction notices, calculating grocery lists down to the penny. They didn't need crypto wallets or investment graphs. They needed simplicity, dignity, tools that made them feel seen, not judged. So Claire listened. Then she built. When she could finally afford help, she didn't hire flashy. She hired Helen. Helen was 62, soft-spoken, and had lost her job at the public library 3 years prior. Claire met her at a community resource meeting. While others spoke about startups and scaling, Helen shared how she'd helped seniors fill out tax forms and teenagers find their first novels. "I'm not technical," Helen had said, adjusting her glasses, "but I'm organized, and I care." That was enough. Claire brought her on part-time. At first, gave her a spot by the window, a refurbished desktop, and a desk lamp she picked up from Goodwill. Helen learned the tools fast. She created systems, filed reports, responded to customer emails with more heart than most bots could ever emulate. They became a small but mighty team, 2 women, decades apart, united by the belief that money management didn't need to be intimidating. It just needed to be human. Cedar Tech didn't make headlines, but it made impact. Community banks started calling small institutions often overlooked by bigger players. They wanted to partner, integrate Claire's tools for their clients. "We've got farmers, single moms, retirees trying to stretch pensions." One bank manager said, "Your app speaks their language." Claire smiled. That was the point. The user base grew steadily, not viral, but faithfully, through word of mouth, through church bulletins, through links forwarded in group texts between mothers, sisters, friends. By the time Lila turned 6, Cedar Tech had over 20,000 active users. Claire still worked from her modest apartment, sometimes from the library when Lila had after-school programs. She bought a real desk, nothing fancy, just sturdy. Lila decorated it with crayon hearts. Her daughter was growing, too. Bright, kind, curious. She loved sitting beside her mother, pretending to type. "I'm helping," she'd say proudly, and often before bed. Lila would tilt her head and ask, "Mom, do I have a dad?" Claire never avoided the question, but she didn't fill it with bitterness either. "You do," she would say gently. He's not with us, but you came from something real, and that matters. Sometimes Lila asked more, sometimes she didn't, but always she looked satisfied, knowing her mother told the truth. Then, one afternoon, an email arrived from a large financial software firm based in Chicago. It was sleek, professional, flattering. They wanted to acquire Cedar Tech, full buyout, 7-figure offer, options for Claire to stay on as advisory consultant, terms negotiable. Claire's breath caught as she read it. It was more money than she had ever imagined. It could mean a real house, health security, a college fund, a life without constant math at the grocery store. She stared at the offer for a long time, then forwarded it to Helen. The reply came 2 hours later. You already know the answer, but I'll say it anyway. We didn't build this to sell. Claire thought back to that first night when the power was off. The baby needed medicine, and she'd lit a candle and started typing. She remembered the ache of silence, the fear of bills, the weight of being unseen. This app wasn't a product. It was a promise, a lifeline, a rebellion against every system that said people like you don't matter. Claire wrote back to the firm politely. She thanked them. And then she declined. No negotiation, no second thoughts. She wasn't building for acquisition. She was building for women who needed to see themselves in something strong. She was building for her daughter, for herself, for the version of her who had once stared at an unopened envelope and chosen to stand anyway. She wasn't building to sell. She was building to stay. 12 years later, the envelope was still sealed until another arrived embossed, gold-edged, with his name inside. It was early spring in Spokane when the letter came. Claire had just returned from dropping Lila off at school, her daughter now a sharp, curious 11-year-old who asked more questions than the internet could answer. The apartment was quiet, soft sunlight streaming through the windows, the kettle just beginning to hum. She almost missed the envelope in the stack of mail wedged between a coupon flyer and a bank statement. But something about the weight made her pause. It was heavier than usual, elegant, embossed with gold trimming, the kind of paper that wasn't sent lightly. She turned it over and saw her name printed in thick black ink, formal, intentional. Inside was an invitation. You are cordially invited to deliver the keynote address at the 2024 West Coast Financial Leadership Summit in Seattle. Washington. There was more. We are honored to host you as our featured speaker on Innovating for the Underserved. Your story, your work, and your impact have inspired a generation of new financial thinkers. Claire blinked slowly. She read it again, then turned to the bottom of the card where the list of honorees and guests of distinction was printed. Her eyes moved down the list until one name stopped her cold. Jonathan Reed, CEO, Reed Tech, Lifetime Achievement Honoree. Her chest tightened, not with anger but with memory. She hadn't seen his name in years, hadn't spoken it out loud, even in private. The envelope he once gave her filled with $75,000, and a quiet dismissal still lay in the same cloth napkin under her bed, untouched, unopened, wrapped like something sacred or dangerous. And now, an invitation. To the same city, the same world, only this time, she was not entering as a secretary. She was walking in as a CEO. That night, Claire made spaghetti for dinner, Lila's favorite. As they sat across from each other, twirling noodles and talking about school, Lila's eyes sparkled with the usual curiosity. "What's that fancy envelope on the table?" she asked. Claire smiled. "It's an invitation. I've been asked to speak at a big financial conference next month." "Oh," Lila grinned, "like with a microphone and everything." "Yes," Claire laughed. "With a microphone and a very big room." Lila leaned forward. Are you nervous? Claire hesitated. A little. Lila raised an eyebrow, teasing. But you talk to banks and important people all the time. This is different, Claire said softly. It's the same place where a lot of things started and ended. For me. Lila was quiet for a moment, chewing. Then she asked, will he be there? Claire didn't ask who he was. She didn't have to. Yes, she said, he will. Lila looked down at her plate, then back at her mother. Are you going to tell him? Claire reached across the table and brushed a piece of pasta off her daughter's chin. No, she said. Not unless he asks. This isn't about him. It's about us. Lila seemed to understand. The next morning, Claire sent her RSVP confirmed. Speaker, Claire Bennett, Cedar Tech Financials. No hesitation, no explanation. In the weeks that followed, Claire prepared her keynote in the quiet hours before sunrise, after bedtime, while water boiled or laundry tumbled. She didn't hire a speechwriter. She didn't rehearse in front of mirrors. She spoke aloud to the silence, letting her words find their rhythm naturally. Her speech wasn't about her hardship. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about vision, about women who built in silence, mothers who coded by candlelight, people who'd been told they weren't the right fit, but made something fit anyway. Helen offered gentle edits. Lila helped choose what dress to wear. Together, they folded the past into something strong enough to carry. And on the night before her trip, Claire did something she hadn't done in 12 years. She reached under her bed and pulled out the old box. The napkin was still there, soft with age. Inside it, the envelope, sealed, untouched. She held it in her hands for a long moment. She didn't open it, but she didn't leave it behind, either. She slid it into her carry-on, alongside her printed speech and the note Lila tucked in without telling her mom, "You're the bravest person I know." Say it like it matters. Because it does. Claire smiled. She wasn't bringing the envelope for closure. She wasn't bringing it for proof. She was bringing it because some things don't need to be opened to remind you of how far you've come. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't name names, but every word was a mirror, and one man couldn't look away. The ballroom at the West Coast Financial Leadership Summit was awash in gold tones and soft applause. Velvet drapes framed the stage, and glass chandeliers hung from above like quiet observers of power. Jonathan Reed sat in the front row, flanked by board members, honored by the evening's program, draped in accolades. Claire stood behind the podium in a navy blue dress, simple and steady. The microphone hummed gently as the crowd settled. The room was full but silent. No forks clinked, no whispers passed. Only her voice broke the stillness. "I want to begin," Claire said, "by telling you a story." She paused. Let it breathe. It's about a woman who worked hard, who was loyal, quiet, careful. She was the kind of person who made coffee before the office lights turned on and stayed late when no one else did. Her eyes scanned the crowd. She didn't come from money. She came from dusty back roads and thrift stores, from hand-me-down books and dreams spoken only in the dark. She didn't expect handouts, just a chance. A few people nodded. Claire continued, her voice even, gentle but unmistakably firm. She was good at her job, until she wasn't needed anymore, or perhaps until she became inconvenient. The air in the room shifted. She was let go. Claire said, while carrying something more precious than a paycheck, she was told it was best for everyone. She left with a sealed envelope, a polite nod, and no plan. Still no names, no accusation, only truth. She moved to a new town, raised a child alone, worked nights, studied by dawn, and built something line by line while the world slept. She paused again, swallowed, steadied. She didn't have investors, just resolve. She didn't have mentors, just the memory of being dismissed. And in time, she built something not just useful, but meaningful. In the front row, Jonathan shifted. His shoulders sank slightly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Claire looked down for a moment, then met the audience again. I stand here today not because I was given opportunity, but because I found it after being denied. And I know I'm not the only one. I know there are thousands of women, mothers, immigrants, caretakers who are building in silence, waiting for someone to believe in them. Murmurs of quiet agreement rippled through the crowd. Then, slowly, she slid her hand into the pocket of her blazer. The envelope was still there. 12 years sealed, 12 years carried, 12 years unopened. She held it gently, not to wave it, not to shame, but simply to show that it existed. I never opened this, she said quietly. Not because I was proud, but because I knew I didn't need what was inside. A pause. What I needed was a voice, a seat at the table, a chance. A long silence followed. Not awkward, but reverent. Even the chandeliers seemed to stand still. Claire lowered her hand, the envelope still unopened, and stepped back from the microphone. I don't tell this story to rewrite the past, she said. I tell it so we can do better. So the next time a woman walks into your office, not with a resume, but with a fire in her chest, you won't send her away with a check. You'll give her a door. Applause didn't come immediately. First, there was quiet. A room processing its own reflection. And then it began slow, sincere, rising. Jonathan didn't clap. He simply sat there, head bowed, hands still, as if remembering everything he chose to forget. Claire walked off the stage with no dramatic flourish, no final look back, and there, standing by the curtain, in a pale blue dress with a crooked bow, was Lila. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her eyes said everything. You did it. You didn't need to yell. You just had to stand. Claire knelt and wrapped her arms around her daughter. In that moment, the lights, the applause, the cameras all disappeared. All that remained was one mother, one child, and the truth that had finally been spoken aloud. Some stories end with revenge. Hers ended with a walk into the sunset, hand in hand with the one who mattered most. The ballroom had emptied, but Claire lingered by the wide glass window, her eyes on the skyline. Seattle shimmered in the dusk, familiar yet distant, like a city from another lifetime. Behind her, the low hum of footsteps broke the stillness. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Claire, Jonathan said, his voice softer than she remembered. Older, less sure. She turned slowly. He looked the same in some ways, the same pressed suit, the same expensive watch, but something had shifted in his face. The lines were deeper, but it wasn't age. It was weight, the kind time alone doesn't give. It was regret. I wasn't sure you'd speak to me, he said. I wasn't sure either. Claire replied. Her tone wasn't angry, just tired, the kind of tired that comes after carrying silence for too long. I watched your speech, he continued. Every word. Claire nodded once. Then you already know everything you need. He hesitated. Is she mine? Claire's eyes didn't flinch. Yes, her name is Lila. She's 11. She likes science, reads 3 books at once, and asks more questions than I can answer. Jonathan exhaled slowly. I didn't know. You didn't ask. A long pause stretched between them, not cold, but weighted, honest. I'm not here to justify what I did, he said. I was afraid of risk, of scandal, of being tied to something I didn't plan for. Claire's gaze didn't shift. You were afraid of a woman who wouldn't disappear quietly. Jonathan swallowed. You're right. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a folded photo, worn at the edges. I found this, he said, handing it to her. From your personnel file. I kept it. It was a photo of her 12 years ago, smiling beside the office Christmas tree, young, hopeful, unaware of how quickly life could fracture. Claire studied it for a second, then returned it to him. I don't need reminders, she said. I lived it. From her own coat pocket, she pulled out something else, the envelope, still sealed. Edges softened with time, his handwriting slightly faded but unmistakable. I kept this too, she said, holding it out. Jonathan looked down at the envelope, the same one he had handed her all those years ago. A parting gift, a bribe, a mistake. You never opened it. Claire shook her head. I didn't need what was inside. I needed a chance, a voice, a door that didn't close behind me. He took it from her slowly, like it burned, like it forgave and condemned at once. I'm sorry, he said again. Claire looked at him, her voice even. I don't need your apology. I didn't come back for closure. I came back to show my daughter that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. Silence fell again, but this time it was gentle. She's beautiful, he murmured, like her mother. Claire stepped back, not coldly, just with finality. She's her own person. That's what matters. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Outside, the evening air was crisp. A soft breeze stirred the street banners and scattered cherry blossoms along the sidewalk. Lila stood by a bench, sipping hot cocoa from a paper cup. She looked up when she saw her mother. Did you talk to him? She asked. Claire nodded. Was he surprised? Claire smiled faintly, more than he expected to be. They began walking down the street, side by side. The city lights glowed above them, but Claire didn't look back, not once. After a few quiet steps, Lila asked, Do I look like him? Claire paused. You have his eyes, she said gently, but your heart, that's yours. Lila smiled at that, a full, proud smile. Good, she whispered. I like being me. Claire reached for her daughter's hand, and they walked together beneath the amber glow of the streetlights. No stage, no spotlight, just two shadows moving forward. She had no need to prove anything anymore, no need for approval or apology. She had raised a child on grace, built a business from grit, and returned to the place that once dismissed her, not to reclaim power, but to release it. Her past no longer defined her. It didn't chase her. It stood behind her, quiet and still. She had already written her own ending, with truth, with strength, with Lila. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to walk away with dignity. Claire's story reminds us that healing doesn't always come with apologies, and justice isn't always loud. There will be moments in life when we are dismissed, overlooked, or quietly pushed aside, not because we lack value, but because others fail to see it. But that doesn't define us. What defines us is what we build afterward in silence, in struggle, and in strength. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight to win. You don't need closure to move on. What you do need is belief. Belief in your worth, even when no one claps. Belief in your path, even when it starts alone. And belief that one day you'll look back not with bitterness, but with peace. This story is not just about Claire. It's about anyone who's ever been counted out and chose to rise anyway. Thank you for spending your time with us and listening to Claire's journey. If her story touched your heart, please consider giving this video a like, sharing it with someone who might need it, and subscribing to our channel for more stories that heal, uplift, and connect us. Your support helps keep these voices alive. See you in the next story.